This is what Brandon wanted.
Is this everything?
It was the only envelope.
Harry Alexander was 44, a quiet forensic financial consultant in Chicago who looked more like an ordinary accountant than someone people feared. Most believed he was a timid husband living in the shadow of his successful wife, Reagan. He drove an aging Toyota Avalon, mowed his own lawn every Saturday, and wore inexpensive blue shirts without caring what anyone thought. What they didn't know was that Harry had spent years helping expose multi-million-dollar corporate fraud, and nothing inside his home safe was ever there by accident. At 2:17 a.m., without opening his eyes, he heard the safe click open and felt Reagan's familiar perfume drift across the room as she reached for the one envelope she believed would change everything. If you're watching from somewhere in the world today, let me know your country and your local time in the comments. I always enjoy seeing where these stories reach. And if you enjoy slow-burn suspense, unexpected twists and stories where patience defeats deception, consider subscribing. Tomorrow's story may make you question how well anyone truly knows the person sleeping beside them. 18 months before Reagan opened the safe, nothing about the Alexander household looked unusual. Their brick colonial home stood on a quiet street in Naperville, a western suburb of Chicago where neighbors knew each other well enough to wave, but rarely well enough to notice what happened behind closed doors. Every weekday at precisely 6:40 a.m., Harry Alexander backed his silver Toyota Avalon out of the driveway. 20 minutes later, Reagan left in her new black BMW X5, usually while speaking through wireless earbuds before she had even reached the end of the block. People assumed they understood the marriage. Harry was the quiet husband. Reagan was the successful wife. The assumption became reality simply because nobody questioned it. At neighborhood barbecues, Reagan entertained guests with stories from Brightstone Medical Systems, where she had recently been promoted to regional sales executive, overseeing the Midwest territory. She spoke confidently about quarterly growth hospital contracts and executive conferences in Dallas, Phoenix, and Boston. Harry rarely interrupted. If someone asked about his work, he answered in one sentence. "I consult on financial compliance." The conversation usually moved on before anyone asked another question. One Saturday afternoon, their neighbor Scott Henderson laughed while flipping burgers. "So, Harry, still counting beans for a living?" Harry smiled politely. "Something like that?" Scott chuckled. "Man, Reagan's the powerhouse in this family." Everyone laughed. Harry did too. Only the narrator could see what nobody else noticed. Harry never laughed because he agreed. He laughed because correcting people had never solved anything. Across the backyard, Reagan accepted another glass of white wine from Scott's wife, Melissa. "Honestly," Reagan said with a playful smile, "Harry is the calmest person I've ever met. I swear if somebody robbed our house, he'd apologize for making them carry something heavy." More laughter. Harry simply turned another hamburger on the grill. His expression never changed. The joke stayed in everyone's memory. Not because it was cruel, because Harry made it seem harmless. That was one of his greatest strengths. Silence often encouraged people to reveal more than arguments ever could. Life continued in predictable routines. Every Saturday morning, Harry cut the grass himself instead of hiring landscapers. Every Sunday, he washed the Avalon by hand. He bought shirts from Costco because they fit comfortably and lasted years. His watch was nearly 10 years old. His leather wallet had worn edges. Nothing about him suggested wealth. Nothing suggested influence. Nothing suggested that federal prosecutors still occasionally called him asking for technical advice on complicated financial cases. Harry preferred it that way. Appear ordinary. Listen carefully. Let other people underestimate you. Reagan's career accelerated quickly. Within 6 months, she'd received a substantial raise, then a performance bonus, then stock options. Her annual income became almost twice Harry's consulting income, at least according to the numbers everyone could see. She celebrated with expensive dinners, designer handbags, luxury hotels during business conferences. Harry congratulated her sincerely every time. When she brought home a bottle of champagne after receiving another promotion, he cooked her favorite steak himself. "I'm proud of you," he said. She smiled. "Thanks." Nothing about the moment felt dishonest. Not yet. The changes began quietly, too quietly for dramatic confrontations. Harry noticed Reagan placing her phone face down whenever she entered the kitchen. At first it happened once, then twice. Soon it became habit. When messages arrived late at night, she glanced at the screen before deciding whether to respond. Sometimes she walked into another room. Harry never asked who was texting. He simply noticed. 3 weeks later, she opened a separate checking account. Her explanation sounded reasonable. "It'll help me separate travel reimbursements from household expenses." Harry nodded. "That makes sense." He even helped her compare banking fees online. Again, he asked no questions. People often mistook his patience for ignorance. They were different things entirely. Business trips increased. A conference in Minneapolis became an extra overnight stay. A meeting in Indianapolis somehow required 3 days. Denver, Atlanta, Seattle. The calendar filled faster than before. Each explanation sounded plausible on its own. Harry never judged individual events. He observed patterns. One evening, Reagan returned home nearly 2 hours later than expected. "Traffic," she explained. "Construction near Interstate 88. Harry kissed her forehead and served reheated pasta. While placing her purse on the kitchen island, Reagan received another message. The screen lit up briefly. Only one name appeared before it disappeared. Nicole. Harry recognized the name. Nicole Harper. Reagan had mentioned her several times over the previous year. Bright, competitive, always chasing promotions. The message vanished before Harry could accidentally read anything else. He wasn't trying to. He simply noticed details because noticing details had become second nature after 20 years working around financial fraud. The following month, Harry attended a professional conference hosted by the Illinois Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. He wasn't a keynote speaker. He preferred sitting quietly near the back. During one seminar discussing suspicious reimbursement schemes inside healthcare companies, one example caught his attention. The instructor displayed anonymous expense records. Certain patterns looked familiar. Inflated travel reimbursements, repeated vendor invoices, layered approval chains. None of the company names appeared on the presentation, but the methodology lingered in Harry's mind long after the conference ended. Back in his office the following Monday, Harry reviewed several unrelated consulting files assigned by a private legal firm in Chicago. One client requested analysis involving vendor payments connected to regional medical suppliers. The assignment had nothing to do with Brightstone Medical Systems, or so it initially appeared. Late that afternoon, Harry noticed one vendor name repeating across multiple documents: Northridge Logistics. He remembered hearing Reagan mention them during dinner months earlier. "They handle some of our equipment deliveries." It seemed like coincidence. Professionals often encountered familiar company names. Harry continued reviewing invoices. Another familiar vendor appeared, then another. By itself, none of it proved wrongdoing, but together the pattern felt uncomfortable. He closed the files, walked into the kitchen, poured himself coffee, then returned to his desk. Rather than jumping to conclusions, Harry created a simple spreadsheet. Date, vendor, invoice amount, approval signature, nothing more. He wasn't investigating Reagan. He was organizing publicly available information connected to his consulting assignment. The distinction mattered: facts before conclusions, evidence before accusations, always. Over the next several weeks, additional consulting work expanded the picture. Brightstone wasn't Harry's client, but companies connected to Brightstone increasingly appeared around reimbursement networks he had already begun documenting. One Friday evening, Reagan walked through the front door smiling. "I've got great news." Harry looked up from preparing dinner. "What happened?" "Our CFO says this could be our biggest year ever. CFO. Brandon Ellis. Harry nodded casually. I don't think you've mentioned him before. He's new, very ambitious. She smiled while opening a bottle of sparkling water. He says we're going national within 3 years. Harry remembered the name, not because of Reagan, because Brandon Ellis had signed several reimbursement approvals buried deep inside financial records Harry had reviewed earlier that week. Harry didn't react. He simply served dinner. Rain tapped softly against the dining room windows while they ate grilled salmon and roasted vegetables. Reagan talked excitedly about expansion plans. Harry listened. She never noticed he asked only practical questions. When does the new budget begin? Who approves regional expenses now? Will your department grow? The questions sounded supportive. They also helped complete missing pieces inside Harry's mental timeline. After dinner, Reagan carried their plates into the kitchen. Her phone buzzed again. She looked at the screen for less than 2 seconds. Then she deleted the message immediately instead of opening it. Harry watched only through the reflection in the dark kitchen window. He said nothing, but for the first time in 18 months, he quietly wrote down one simple note before going to bed. 8:47 p.m. Message received. Deleted immediately. No response. The timeline had officially begun. Harry Alexander never believed instincts were enough. Instincts could point in the right direction, but evidence decided whether a suspicion deserved to survive. That principle had guided every important investigation of his career, and it became even more important when the person standing closest to the facts was his own wife. 3 mornings after Reagan deleted the mysterious message in the kitchen, Harry drove downtown before sunrise. Chicago's financial district was still waking up. Delivery trucks occupied the loading zones. Office lights flickered on one floor at a time. Commuters hurried toward Union Station carrying coffee cups and laptop bags. Harry parked 2 blocks away from the Dirksen Federal Building. He was not meeting federal agents. Not yet. Instead, he walked into the offices of Donnelly and Pierce LLP, a boutique law firm specializing in corporate compliance. Michael Donnelly was already waiting. The attorney was 56, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, and known throughout Illinois for advising Fortune 500 companies before problems became criminal investigations. He and Harry had crossed paths years earlier while assisting separate clients during an accounting fraud case. Their friendship had never depended on frequent conversations. It depended on mutual respect. Michael poured 2 cups of black coffee before Harry sat down. You look like you've been thinking, Michael said. I have. Personal or professional? Harry looked out the office window for several seconds before answering. I'm no longer sure. Michael didn't interrupt. Harry appreciated that. Too many lawyers rushed toward conclusions because clients often demanded immediate answers. Michael preferred questions. Harry slid a legal pad across the conference table. Every page contained dates, nothing else. Michael read quietly. Late business trips, deleted message, separate bank account, repeated vendor names, executive approvals, travel reimbursements, no accusations, no emotional notes. Only observations. After nearly 5 minutes, Michael placed the notebook on the table. You haven't broken any laws collecting this? No. You haven't accessed her phone? No. Her email? No. Private accounts? No. Michael nodded once. Good. Harry leaned back. I'm not trying to prove she's guilty of anything. I know. I'm trying to understand whether she's standing too close to something dangerous. Michael folded his hands. That's a very different objective. Silence settled over the room. Finally, the attorney spoke again. If you're right, impatience will destroy whatever truth exists. Harry had expected exactly that answer. If I'm wrong, then patience protects your marriage. Neither man smiled. The conversation required neither comfort nor optimism, only discipline. Before leaving, Harry asked one final question. If someone believed confidential financial documents were inside my home safe. Michael looked up. What would you advise? The attorney thought carefully. I'd advise making sure the documents inside are exactly the documents you want someone to steal. Harry didn't answer immediately. Instead, he thanked Michael for his time and left the office. By noon, he was driving toward First Midwest Bank in Oak Brook. Unlike the modest branch near his neighborhood, this location offered private safe deposit boxes inside a reinforced vault beneath the main banking floor. Harry rented the smallest available box. The process required identification signatures and multiple security checks. Everything was routine. Everything was documented. Inside the vault, he unlocked the new box and carefully placed several sealed folders inside. Original consulting records, professional licenses, federal correspondence from previous investigations, encrypted backup drives. Most importantly, every document connected to his current consulting assignments. Nothing irreplaceable would remain inside his home office after that afternoon. The home safe would soon become something else entirely. Not bait, not a trap intended to accuse someone, a controlled environment. Harry spent the following weekend reorganizing his office. He purchased identical manila folders from an office supply store in Downers Grove. He printed duplicate copies of harmless financial reports. Some came from publicly available corporate filings. Others contained outdated spreadsheets with no legal value whatsoever. Every page received a tiny forensic identifier invisible to the naked eye. The markings weren't electronic. They weren't GPS trackers or secret transmitters like those found in movies. Reality worked differently. Each page carried microscopic printing variations created through controlled printer alignment and nearly invisible reference dots positioned at predetermined locations. If photocopied or scanned, the identifiers could still establish where the page originally came from. Harry had used similar techniques years earlier while assisting internal corporate investigations. Perfectly legal, remarkably effective. He numbered every page, recorded every sequence, stored matching records inside the bank vault. No one except Harry knew which copies matched which numbers. The process required patience, nearly 3 evenings. Reagan barely noticed. She was preparing for another regional sales conference in Minneapolis. Boxes of promotional materials filled the dining room, corporate brochures, presentation folders, product samples. Their conversations became practical. What time is your flight? 6:30. Need me to drive you? Warm. I'll take an Uber. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. On Tuesday afternoon, Harry installed a new motion logging system inside his home office. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't directed toward private spaces. It monitored only the office entrance and safe area. The equipment simply recorded timestamps whenever movement occurred inside the room. No audio, no bedroom, no bathrooms, nothing invasive. Michael had insisted on those limitations. If this ever becomes evidence, the attorney warned during a phone call, the method must be cleaner than the people you're investigating. Harry followed that advice without exception. By Friday evening, the office looked almost identical to before. Only Harry knew how much had changed. The genuine files were gone. The copies had replaced them. The safe contained paperwork that appeared important but held little actual value. One folder, however, looked different. A thick, cream-colored envelope. No labels, no markings, no indication of what rested inside. In reality, it contained nothing but duplicated summaries, outdated financial analyses, and carefully marked pages that would immediately identify themselves if they ever resurfaced. Harry locked the safe, spun the dial twice, walked away. For nearly 2 weeks, nothing happened. Life continued with deceptive normality. Reagan traveled twice. Harry completed consulting reports for 2 manufacturing companies. Neighbors discussed summer vacation plans. Scott Henderson invited Harry to a Cubs game. The routine almost convinced him he had worried unnecessarily. Then, on a rainy Wednesday afternoon, his office phone rang. The caller identification displayed a name Harry hadn't expected. Daniel Brooks. Harry answered. "It's been a while." Special Agent Daniel Brooks laughed softly. Too long. Daniel remained assigned to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division in Chicago. Years earlier, he and Harry had worked parallel investigations involving securities fraud and corporate embezzlement. Their professional relationship had ended when Harry entered private consulting. "What can I do for you?" Harry asked. Daniel's voice became more serious. "I have an unusual question." "I'm listening." "Has anyone contacted you recently, asking about one of your old healthcare consulting cases?" Harry paused. "No. We had an inquiry." "From whom?" "I can't discuss that." Harry understood immediately. "If you're calling me something unusual happened." Daniel hesitated. "Someone attempted to obtain background information connected to a financial review you completed almost 18 months ago." Harry stared through the office window. Cars rolled past beneath gray skies. Pedestrians hurried through the rain. His heartbeat remained steady. "Did they succeed?" "No." "Do you know why they'd wanted it?" "Not yet." Daniel lowered his voice. "I remembered your name because the request seemed unexpected." Harry thanked him. They exchanged a few professional courtesies before ending the call. For several minutes, Harry remained seated without moving. The attempted inquiry could have been unrelated. Coincidences existed. He believed that. But coincidences also demanded verification. He opened the spreadsheet he had quietly maintained for weeks. Another blank line waited at the bottom. He typed only 5 words. "External inquiry regarding prior case. No speculation, no conclusions. Just another fact added to a growing timeline." Across town, Reagan boarded an elevator at Brightstone Medical Systems, carrying a leather portfolio under one arm. She smiled at a passing coworker. She never imagined that somewhere else in Chicago, 2 entirely separate investigations had just moved one careful step closer to intersecting. Harry didn't know whether that intersection would ever come. He only knew one thing with absolute certainty. Someone had begun searching for information, and someone somewhere believed Harry Alexander already possessed exactly what they needed. Harry Alexander had learned one lesson long before he became a private consultant. The loudest person in the room almost never possessed the strongest evidence. That lesson had been earned 15 years earlier inside another office building, another conference room, and another corporate scandal that had dominated Chicago's financial news for months. Back then, Harry had never intended to become known among federal investigators. He had started exactly where most forensic accountants did. Behind spreadsheets, inside conference rooms, working 80-hour weeks for one of the country's largest accounting firms. The work itself wasn't glamorous. Thousands of invoices, bank transfers, purchase orders, expense reports. Numbers repeated themselves until patterns slowly emerged. Most accountants looked for mistakes. Harry looked for intentions. Mistakes happened once, intentions repeated themselves. His unusual ability caught the attention of federal investigators after he quietly identified a reimbursement scheme hidden beneath nearly 40,000 legitimate transactions. The criminals hadn't stolen millions through dramatic wire transfers. They had taken $32,000 here, $47,000 there. Small amounts, scattered over 6 years. Enough to disappear among ordinary business expenses. Harry found them because he noticed one approval signature appearing 37 seconds after every electronic submission, regardless of whether the approval occurred on a Tuesday afternoon or Christmas morning. No human being reviewed documents that quickly. Software did. The signature had been automated. That single observation eventually uncovered a fraud network worth nearly $68 million. The headlines mentioned prosecutors, corporate executives, federal agents. Harry's name appeared only once near the bottom of one newspaper article. He preferred it that way. Recognition attracted attention. Attention created assumptions. Assumptions made future investigations harder. When the case concluded, Assistant United States Attorney Olivia Grant invited Harry to lunch. She was one of the youngest federal prosecutors in Chicago to lead a major financial fraud conviction. Over grilled chicken sandwiches in a quiet restaurant overlooking the Chicago River, she asked a question Harry never forgot. "Have you ever considered joining the government?" Harry smiled politely. "I already work with the government." "I mean permanently." Harry shook his head. "I do better outside the spotlight." Olivia laughed. "You know what your problem is?" Harry waited. "You underestimate how valuable you are." Harry stirred his coffee before answering. "No, I think other people overestimate visibility." Olivia remembered that sentence years later. She quoted it during legal seminars whenever discussing confidential investigations. Harry continued accepting occasional requests from federal agencies, always as an outside consultant, never as a permanent employee. The arrangement suited everyone. He remained independent. Government investigators gained specialized expertise. Most importantly, very few people outside those investigations ever learned his name. Reagan certainly hadn't. When they met 8 years earlier, through mutual friends, Harry described himself simply as a forensic accountant. She assumed he reviewed tax documents and corporate budgets. He never corrected her. Not because he wanted to hide anything, because he believed work belonged at work. Marriage belonged at home. The first few years together had been uncomplicated. Reagan admired Harry's calm personality. Harry admired Reagan's ambition. She encouraged him to travel more. He encouraged her to pursue promotions. Neither competed with the other. The imbalance appeared only after Reagan entered senior management at Brightstone Medical Systems. Corporate success changed her environment. Vice presidents, executive retreats, luxury hotels, private dinners with hospital administrators. Gradually, appearances became increasingly important inside her professional world. Luxury watches, European handbags, imported cars, vacation photos from Santorini and Aspen. Harry never criticized those things. He simply didn't participate. He still wore the same brown leather shoes until the soles required replacement. He still packed homemade lunches. He still preferred repairing household appliances instead of replacing them. To Harry, efficiency represented discipline. To many of Reagan's co-workers, it looked like financial limitation. One evening, Brightstone hosted an executive networking reception at the Langham Hotel in downtown Chicago. Spouses were invited. Harry arrived wearing a navy suit he had owned for nearly 7 years. Perfectly tailored, perfectly clean, perfectly ordinary. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers. Sales directors discussed expansion plans, while waiters carried silver trays filled with shrimp cocktails and champagne. Reagan introduced Harry to several executives. Most conversations lasted less than a minute. "What do you do?" "I'm an independent financial consultant." "Oh." The response rarely changed. Without prestigious titles or expensive accessories, Harry blended into the background almost immediately. He preferred it. Across the ballroom, Reagan joined a conversation with senior leadership. Harry wandered toward a quieter corner overlooking the river. He wasn't avoiding people. He enjoyed observing them. Clusters formed naturally. Junior employees gravitated toward ambitious managers. Hospital administrators spoke mostly with executives controlling regional budgets. Finance staff rarely left Brandon Ellis's side. Harry recognized him instantly from public corporate filings. Brandon stood nearly 6'3", impeccably dressed in a charcoal Italian suit, speaking confidently to everyone who approached. His smile remained constant. Perhaps too constant. While accepting a sparkling water from a passing server, Harry noticed something subtle. Brandon ended nearly every conversation by touching someone's elbow. Briefly, comfortably, creating familiarity. It was a practiced gesture, not accidental. The same technique often appeared during depositions involving persuasive corporate personalities. Physical reassurance encouraged trust. Trust reduced skepticism. Harry filed the observation away. Nothing more. Several minutes later, Reagan approached with another executive beside her. "Harry, this is our CFO, Brandon Ellis." Brandon extended his hand immediately. "I've heard you're the numbers guy at home." Harry smiled. "So I've been told." Brandon laughed. "I keep telling Reagan she deserves credit for carrying the family financially." Reagan laughed too. Harry noticed the joke. More importantly, he noticed Brandon watching carefully to see how Harry reacted. Harry simply shrugged. "She's worked hard?" Brandon nodded approvingly. "That's a healthy attitude." The conversation shifted toward hospital contracts before ending naturally. As Brandon walked away, Harry continued watching him through the ballroom crowd, not suspiciously, professionally. Something about Brandon's conversational rhythm felt unusually controlled. He remembered names quickly, repeated personal details, adapted his tone within seconds depending on whom he addressed. Excellent executive skills, or excellent manipulation. Sometimes the difference appeared only after evidence accumulated. Driving home later that evening, Reagan couldn't stop talking. "Everyone loves Brandon. He seems capable." "Capable, Harry? He's brilliant." She laughed. "The board practically worships him." Harry kept both hands on the steering wheel. "What was his background before Brightstone?" "I think private equity." "You think?" "I never asked." The answer lingered in Harry's thoughts. Large corporations usually celebrated executive backgrounds, degrees, former employers, major accomplishments. Yet Reagan, who worked directly beneath Brandon's leadership structure, knew surprisingly little about him. The following Tuesday, Harry completed another consulting assignment involving vendor payment analysis. One familiar signature appeared again. Brandon Ellis. Then another. Then another. Not unusual. Chief financial officers approved expenses every day. But Harry noticed the approval dates. Every questionable reimbursement tied to Brightstone's regional expansion eventually flowed through Brandon's office. Again, not proof, just another repeating pattern. Late Thursday afternoon, Harry received another call from Daniel Brooks. "This one's unofficial," the FBI agent said. Harry listened. "We're reviewing several healthcare reimbursement networks." Harry remained silent. "I can't discuss details." "I understand." Daniel paused. "But I wanted to ask something." "What?" "Do you happen to know anyone currently working inside Brightstone Medical Systems?" Harry stared quietly across his office. Family photographs rested on one bookshelf. Tax manuals filled another. Rain tapped softly against the windows. He answered carefully. "My wife works there." Silence followed, longer than before. When Daniel finally spoke again, his voice carried an unfamiliar seriousness. "I didn't know that. Neither did I think it mattered." "It might?" Harry's expression remained calm. "What are you asking me?" "I'm asking whether your wife has ever mentioned unusual executive behavior." Harry considered every conversation he and Reagan had shared during the past year. Late meetings, travel, promotions, Brandon Ellis, Nicole Harper, executive dinners, nothing concrete, only fragments. "No," Harry answered truthfully. Daniel sighed. "If anything changes." "It will." The call ended. Harry remained seated for several minutes. Outside, another ordinary Chicago afternoon continued without interruption. Inside his office, however, two completely separate timelines had begun drifting toward each other. One belonged to his marriage. The other belonged to a federal investigation. For the first time, Harry could no longer be certain they would remain separate for much longer. Harry did not believe in setting traps. A trap depended on someone's failure. Evidence depended on someone's choice. The distinction mattered to him because one could be manipulated, while the other could withstand scrutiny in a courtroom. 3 days after Daniel Brooks mentioned the growing federal inquiry, Harry drove west to Oak Brook once again. The traffic along Interstate 88 moved steadily beneath gray October skies. Radio stations discussed football scores and weekend weather, but Harry barely heard them. His thoughts stayed on one question. If someone believed confidential documents existed inside his home, safe, how far would they go to obtain them? That question had become more important than whether Reagan herself had done anything wrong. He parked outside Michael Donnelly's office shortly before 9. The attorney was already reviewing a stack of contracts when Harry entered. "You look like you've reached a decision," Michael said. Harry nodded. "I think someone is searching for information they believe I possess." "You still don't know who?" "No." "And you still don't have proof Reagan is involved?" "I don't." Michael closed the file in front of him. "Good." Harry raised an eyebrow. "Good. I'd be worried if you sounded certain." The attorney leaned back in his chair. "Certainty without evidence ruins investigations." Harry smiled faintly. "That's why I'm here." For the next hour, they reviewed every step Harry had taken during the previous month. No unauthorized surveillance. No intercepted communications. No access to Reagan's private devices. Every observation came from shared spaces, public records, or Harry's own consulting work. Michael approved each decision. Then they discussed the safe. "I've moved every original document," Harry explained. "The bank vault. Yes. And what's left at home?" "Copies." Michael folded his hands. "Walk me through them." Harry opened his briefcase. Inside rested 3 identical cream-colored envelopes. Each appeared equally important. Only one would eventually be placed inside the home safe. The first contained outdated financial summaries from consulting cases already closed years earlier, perfectly legal, entirely useless. The second contained publicly available corporate filings downloaded from the Securities and Exchange Commission website. Again, nothing confidential. The third looked the most convincing. Inside rested carefully organized spreadsheets, reimbursement summaries, vendor analyses, and handwritten notes. Every page appeared authentic. Every page carried microscopic forensic identifiers. Every page had been intentionally designed to resemble the type of evidence someone desperately wanted to steal. Michael slowly examined several sheets. "If this leaves your house..." Harry nodded. "I'll know exactly which pages were taken. And if they're copied..." "The identifiers survive standard scanning." Michael smiled. "I remember why prosecutors liked working with you." Harry said nothing. The attorney placed the documents back inside the envelope. "One condition?" Harry waited. "You don't accuse anyone." "I won't." "You don't confront Reagan." "I won't." "You allow events to unfold naturally." Harry answered immediately. "That's always been the plan." Michael stood and extended his hand. "Then I think you're protecting evidence, not manufacturing it." Those words mattered. Harry never wanted the investigation contaminated by emotional decisions. Everything had to remain lawful. Everything had to remain voluntary. Nobody would be forced to take anything. If the envelope disappeared, it would disappear because someone chose to remove it. Later that afternoon, Harry returned home. The house was quiet. Reagan wouldn't return until nearly 6. He entered his upstairs office carrying only the cream-colored envelope. Sunlight filtered through the blinds. Dust floated lazily across the room. The safe sat behind a framed landscape painting exactly where it had remained since they purchased the house. Harry unlocked it. Inside rested several items. A few $100s in emergency cash. His late father's pocket watch. Old passports. 2 family photo albums. The envelope. He rearranged everything carefully. The envelope stayed near the front. Easy to notice, easy to reach. He locked the safe again. Then, something unexpected occurred to him. The combination. Reagan had never asked for it, not once. If someone intended to open the safe someday, they first needed access. Harry considered changing the combination to something entirely new. Instead, another idea formed. Several evenings later, Reagan prepared dinner while Harry stood nearby sorting mail. Without mentioning the safe, he casually walked into his office carrying several folders. A few minutes afterward, Reagan entered, looking for a stapler. Harry pretended not to notice. He deliberately opened the safe. Slowly. Without shielding the keypad, his body blocked most of the dial, but not all of it. Anyone watching carefully could easily believe they had memorized enough of the sequence. Harry removed one folder, closed the safe, returned downstairs. The entire moment lasted less than 20 seconds. He never looked toward Reagan, never acknowledged she had entered the room. If she had been paying attention, she now believed she possessed useful information. If she hadn't, nothing had changed. Either outcome suited Harry. The following week, life settled into another familiar routine. Reagan traveled to Milwaukee for 2 days. Harry completed an audit for a manufacturing client in Aurora. Their evenings remained polite, comfortable, almost ordinary. But Harry noticed subtle changes. Reagan began lingering inside his office whenever she passed through the hallway. Only briefly. Sometimes she claimed she was looking for printer paper. Other times she searched for postage stamps or spare batteries. Each explanation sounded reasonable. Each visit lasted only a minute or two. Harry never questioned her. He simply noted dates inside the growing timeline stored on his encrypted laptop. Monday. Office for 90 seconds. Wednesday. Office while Harry answered the door. Friday. Asked whether the office safe still worked after its battery replacement. That last question surprised him. They had been eating dinner. Nothing in the conversation involved security. Yet Reagan suddenly looked toward the upstairs hallway. "Did you ever replace the battery in your safe?" Harry looked up calmly. "I did. I was just wondering." "It works fine." She nodded. "Good." The conversation immediately shifted toward weekend grocery shopping. Harry continued eating. Inside, another piece quietly settled into place. She wasn't asking about jewelry. She wasn't asking about cash. She was asking whether the safe itself remained functional. That detail mattered. 2 nights later, Harry received another encrypted email from Daniel Brooks. No classified information, only a simple request. "Can we meet tomorrow?" "Same place." Harry agreed. The following afternoon, they met inside a small coffee shop several blocks away from the FBI field office. Daniel arrived wearing jeans instead of a suit. No badge, no briefcase, just coffee. "We're getting closer," Daniel said quietly. Harry listened. "We've identified unusual reimbursement activity connected to several healthcare vendors." Harry nodded. "I assume you can't tell me which companies?" Daniel smiled faintly. "You assume correctly." Harry stirred his coffee. "I have a question." Daniel waited. "If someone believed I possessed financial evidence, they might try obtaining it." "Legally." Daniel looked directly at him. "Not everyone chooses the legal option." Harry remained silent. Daniel lowered his voice. "Whatever you do, don't advertise what you know." "I don't." "Good." The agent hesitated before continuing. "We've also learned someone inside one of the companies has been asking unusually detailed questions about independent forensic consultants." Harry's expression never changed. Specifically about you." The sounds inside the coffee shop continued around them. Espresso machines hissed. Customers chatted. A barista called out drink orders. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary. Only Harry felt the significance of Daniel's words. Someone wasn't merely searching for financial records anymore. Someone was searching for him. That evening, Reagan arrived home carrying takeout from their favorite Italian restaurant. She smiled as though nothing unusual had happened. "I figured neither of us wanted to cook." Harry smiled back. "Good choice." During dinner, she mentioned an upcoming executive strategy meeting. Nicole Harper would attend. Brandon Ellis would lead the presentation. Several vice presidents from corporate headquarters were flying into Chicago. Harry listened carefully. What day? Next Thursday. Big meeting? Huge. She laughed softly. Brandon says it could determine the company's next 5 years? Harry nodded. Then Reagan asked a question so casually that most husbands would have forgotten it within minutes. By the way, Harry looked up. Do you still keep your consulting files in the safe upstairs? He placed his fork gently beside the plate. Some of them. Anything important? The important things stay protected, she smiled. I figured. The conversation moved on, but Harry never forgot those 3 words. Anything important. They sounded harmless. Perhaps they were. Or perhaps someone else had begun asking the same question. Harry simply happened to hear it first. The house settled differently after midnight. During the day, the Alexander home carried familiar sounds that blended into the background without effort. The refrigerator hummed softly in the kitchen. The heating vents expanded and contracted as warm air moved through the walls. Cars occasionally passed along the quiet street outside. None of those sounds meant anything. After midnight, every sound acquired weight. Harry had learned that years earlier while assisting investigators during covert document preservation operations. Darkness amplified ordinary noises because the mind had fewer distractions. That Friday evening had unfolded without conflict. Reagan returned home around 6, carrying leftovers from a client dinner in downtown Chicago. She apologized for being late. Harry smiled. No problem. They watched half of a baseball game together in the living room. She answered 2 business emails. He finished reading several compliance reports for a manufacturing client in Rockford. Around 10:30, they went upstairs. Nothing unusual happened. No arguments, no accusations, no difficult conversations. Reagan kissed Harry lightly before turning off her bedside lamp. Good night? Good night. Within minutes, her breathing settled into what sounded like sleep. Harry closed his eyes. He did not pretend. He actually slept. Years of disciplined work had taught him something valuable. If a moment truly mattered, forcing yourself to stay awake usually made you miss it. Real sleep restored patience. Patience restored judgment. The digital alarm clock beside the bed glowed softly. 12:41 a.m. The house remained silent. 1:18 a.m. A furnace cycle ended. Silence returned. Harry shifted once beneath the blanket. Still asleep. Then a faint movement. Not loud enough to wake most people, but enough. His eyes remained closed. The mattress dipped almost imperceptibly as Reagan slowly sat upright. She waited. Harry heard nothing for nearly 30 seconds. She was listening, measuring his breathing, confirming what she believed. Harry let each breath remain slow and even. Eventually, the mattress rose again. Bare feet touched the hardwood floor. Another pause. Then soft footsteps disappeared into the hallway. Harry counted silently. 5, 10, 15 seconds. A door hinge upstairs released a tiny creak. His office. He opened neither his eyes nor his mouth. The hallway remained quiet again. Another 30 seconds passed. Then came the sound he had anticipated for weeks. Click. The tiny metallic movement traveled through the silent house with astonishing clarity. The office safe. Harry knew that sound well. He had opened it thousands of times. The combination lock always produced the same delicate sequence. Metal turning against metal. One slow rotation, pause, another, a third, then click. The locking bolts disengaged. His heartbeat remained steady. He did not move. A lesser man might have rushed upstairs, demanded explanations, turned suspicion into accusation. Harry understood something different. The truth had finally begun moving. Interrupting it now would destroy months of careful preparation. He focused instead on details. Footsteps remained slow, deliberate, no hesitation. Whoever stood inside the office already knew exactly where the safe was located. Another sound followed. The heavy steel door swung open. Its hinges produced the quiet scrape Harry recognized instantly. Several seconds passed. Paper shifted. Not much, just enough. Whoever searched the safe wasn't opening folders one by one. They already knew what they wanted. Harry felt an unexpected heaviness settle inside his chest. Not anger, disappointment. Weeks earlier, he had still hoped the questions about the safe had been meaningless, coincidental. Tonight, those hopes quietly disappeared. Upstairs, another gentle sound reached him. The sliding whisper of a thick envelope leaving the shelf. Only one, not two, not several, just one. Harry knew immediately which envelope had been removed. The cream-colored folder resting near the front. Exactly where he had left it. Nothing else moved. No watches. No emergency cash. No passports. No jewelry. Nothing. The person upstairs had ignored every object carrying obvious financial value. Only documents mattered. That realization told Harry more than any confession could have. This had never been theft motivated by money. Someone wanted information. The safe door closed. The combination dial spun once. Not enough to fully secure it, only enough to appear locked. Harry noticed the difference. Another detail, another fact. Soft footsteps crossed the hallway, stopped briefly outside the bedroom. Harry slowed his breathing even further. The bedroom door eased open. Bare feet crossed the carpet. The mattress lowered once again. Reagan carefully settled beneath the blanket. Silence. Nearly a full minute passed. Then Harry heard something unexpected. A whisper. Barely audible. So that's what Brandon wanted. Harry almost opened his eyes. Almost. Instead, he remained perfectly still. One sentence, 7 words. But those 7 words changed everything. Until that moment, Harry had only suspected Brandon Ellis occupied the center of whatever investigation surrounded Brightstone Medical Systems. Now Brandon's name had entered his own bedroom, not through public records, not through consulting reports, through Reagan herself. Harry felt no satisfaction, only certainty. Minutes passed. Reagan's breathing gradually deepened. This time, she genuinely fell asleep. Harry waited another 15 minutes before carefully opening his eyes. The bedroom remained dark, except for the faint glow of the alarm clock. 2:49 a.m. He slowly sat upright without making a sound. Reagan never stirred. Harry slipped from bed, walked quietly into the hallway, entered his office. Moonlight spilled across the carpet through partially opened blinds. The painting still hung slightly crooked where it concealed the wall safe. Harry unlocked it. The steel door swung open, exactly as expected. The emergency cash remained untouched. His father's pocket watch rested in its velvet case. Old passports, photo albums, everything remained precisely where he had arranged it. Only the cream-colored envelope had disappeared. He examined the shelves carefully. No fingerprints, no obvious disturbances, nothing dramatic, just one missing envelope. Harry closed the safe. Instead of replacing the missing folder, he photographed the interior with his phone. Timestamp, 2:53 a.m. Then he photographed the partially rotated combination dial. One more detail, one more fact. Back downstairs, he opened the encrypted investigation file stored on his laptop. The screen illuminated the dark kitchen. He entered several brief lines. 2:17 a.m. Movement detected. 2:19 a.m. Safe opened. One envelope removed. Cash untouched. Valuables untouched. Subject returned to bedroom. Observed verbal reference. Brandon. Harry read the notes twice. Nothing emotional appeared. No assumptions, only observable facts. He encrypted the file again, closed the laptop, poured himself a glass of water. Outside, a light rain had begun falling over Naperville. Streetlights reflected across the wet pavement. Everything looked peaceful, ordinary. Harry stood quietly beside the kitchen window. For several moments, he simply watched the rain. The most painful part wasn't losing the envelope. He had expected that. The painful part was recognizing how calmly Reagan had done it. No panic, no uncertainty. She had entered the office with a clear purpose. Someone had convinced her those documents mattered enough to risk betraying the quiet trust that had defined their marriage for 8 years. Harry finished the glass of water. He did not wake Reagan. He did not demand answers. He did not search her purse or follow her phone. Instead, he returned upstairs, lay down carefully, closed his eyes. Morning would come soon enough. Evidence was already moving exactly where it needed to go. Now, the only question remaining was who would eventually receive the envelope and how many hands it would pass through before the truth finally revealed itself. Harry treated the missing envelope the same way he treated every important piece of evidence throughout his career. He never chased it. He followed its path. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and cool autumn air. Reagan acted exactly as she always did. She brewed coffee before 7, watered the flowers on the back patio, and asked Harry whether he wanted pancakes or scrambled eggs. Nothing in her behavior suggested she had quietly opened the safe only a few hours earlier. Harry answered naturally. "Scrambled eggs sound good?" She smiled. "You always choose the healthy option." "I try." There was no tension in his voice, no hidden accusation. If Reagan expected him to notice anything unusual, she found no indication that he suspected a thing. During breakfast, she talked about Brightstone's executive strategy meeting, scheduled for the following Thursday. "Corporate headquarters is sending 3 vice presidents," she said while pouring orange juice. Harry buttered a slice of toast. "That sounds important." "It is. Brandon wants everyone perfectly prepared." Harry nodded. "Long day. Probably 12 hours." He simply smiled. "I'll keep dinner warm." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Thanks." For a brief moment, Harry remembered the woman he had married. The ambitious young sales representative who believed hard work solved nearly every problem. He wondered whether she realized how far she had already crossed a line she could never uncross. After breakfast, Reagan left for the gym. Harry waited until her car disappeared around the corner before walking upstairs. The motion logging system confirmed exactly what he expected. One entry. 2:18 a.m. Office door opened. 2:23 a.m. Office door closed. The timestamps matched his own observations almost perfectly. He exported the log onto an encrypted flash drive. Then he called Michael Donnelly. "I think it's time." Michael understood immediately. "The envelope. It's gone." "Were you confronted?" "No." "Did you confront her?" "No." "Good." The attorney remained silent for a few seconds. "What happens now?" Harry looked out the office window. "Now we wait to see where it goes." Michael answered carefully. "Remember something." "I'm listening." People rarely steal information for themselves. They steal it for someone else. Harry thanked him before ending the call. That sentence echoed inside his mind for the rest of the afternoon. Someone else. If Reagan had taken the envelope because Brandon Ellis requested it, then Brandon probably wouldn't keep it either. Corporate fraud almost always moved information upward before it disappeared. Every transfer created another opportunity to document its path. Late Monday afternoon, Harry received an unexpected email from Daniel Brooks. The message contained only 6 words: "Need to meet. Today, if possible." They met inside a quiet, public library conference room instead of their usual coffee shop. Daniel placed a thin manila folder on the table. "I can't leave this with you." "I understand. I can let you read it." Harry opened the folder. Inside rested copies of publicly obtainable corporate filings, vendor registration records, and organizational charts. Nothing classified, nothing protected. Daniel pointed toward one page. Recognize the company, Northridge Logistics. Harry nodded. I've seen the name. Daniel flipped to another page. And this one, Midwest Clinical Distribution. Harry recognized that vendor as well. Both companies had appeared repeatedly in reimbursement records connected to Brightstone. Daniel lowered his voice. These vendors have something in common. Harry continued reading. They share accounting services. Keep going. Another page listed corporate officers. Harry stopped. One director's name appeared on both companies. Curtis Vaughn. Harry looked up. I've never heard of him. Neither had we until 3 weeks ago. Daniel slid another document across the table. Curtis Vaughn had previously served as financial controller for 2 companies investigated years earlier for procurement fraud. Neither case resulted in criminal convictions. Both companies dissolved before investigators completed their work. Daniel tapped the page. We think he's building shell vendor networks. Harry considered the timeline. And Brightstone. We're not ready to reach conclusions. Harry appreciated the wording. Not ready. Evidence first. Conclusions later. Daniel leaned forward. Has anything unusual happened since we last spoke? Harry paused. He had prepared for this question. Without revealing private details about Reagan, he answered honestly. I believe someone accessed documents stored inside my home. Daniel's expression sharpened. Were they confidential? No. Were they supposed to look confidential? Harry met his eyes. Yes. Daniel understood immediately. You anticipated this. I prepared for the possibility. Can you identify the documents? Every page. The FBI agent slowly leaned back. I don't want names. You won't get any. I don't want assumptions. You won't get those either. Daniel smiled faintly. That's why I trust you. Before leaving, Daniel gave one final piece of advice. If those papers surface during our investigation, don't interfere. I won't. Let them arrive naturally. Harry nodded. They're already on their way. Tuesday morning, Brightstone Medical Systems buzzed with preparation for Thursday's executive meeting. Employees carried presentation boards through the hallways, conference rooms filled with printed reports. Assistants hurried between offices carrying revised budgets. Nicole Harper stood outside Reagan's office holding a stack of folders. You've got a minute. Sure. Nicole closed the door behind her. You finished Brandon's package? Reagan hesitated. Almost? Nicole lowered her voice. He keeps asking whether you brought the additional material. Reagan glanced toward the hallway before answering. I'm working on it. Nicole frowned. He sounded nervous. So did I. Nicole crossed her arms. I don't like this. Reagan forced a smile. It'll be over soon. Neither woman noticed the security camera outside the hallway. Neither realized that another employee walking past had overheard only one sentence. It'll be over soon. Meanwhile, Harry completed an entirely different task. Inside his office, he opened the notebook that had remained nearly untouched for months. The timeline now covered several pages. Separate bank account, late-night messages, questions about the safe, movement logs, envelope removed, reference to Brandon. Each event alone appeared insignificant. Together they formed a sequence. Harry drew a straight line beneath the final entry. Then he wrote 3 words. Await next transfer. That afternoon, his phone rang. The caller identification displayed an unfamiliar number. Mr. Alexander? Yes. My name is Olivia Grant. Harry recognized it immediately. Assistant United States Attorney Olivia Grant. They had not spoken in almost 5 years. It's been a long time, Harry said. It has. What can I do for you? I'd rather ask what you've been doing. Harry smiled slightly. Consulting. I know. She paused. I also know Daniel Brooks recently contacted you. Harry remained silent. Olivia continued. I'm not asking you to disclose privileged information. I wouldn't. I know you wouldn't. Her voice softened. I just wanted to remind you of something. Harry waited. When good people discover bad news involving people they love. She hesitated. They sometimes destroy evidence trying to protect them. Harry closed his eyes briefly. I won't. I believed you wouldn't. Another pause. Take care of yourself, Harry. You too. The call ended. Harry sat quietly for several minutes. He understood why Olivia had called, not as a prosecutor, as someone who had watched dozens of investigations collapse because families panicked at exactly the wrong moment. He wouldn't make that mistake. That evening, Reagan returned home unusually late. She looked exhausted. Everything okay? Harry asked. She forced a tired smile. Just a stressful day. He poured her a cup of tea. She accepted it gratefully. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Finally, Reagan looked across the living room. Harry. Yes. If something complicated happened at work. He looked up from his book. Would you still believe people deserve a second chance? The question lingered between them. Harry answered honestly. I believe everyone deserves the chance to tell the truth. Reagan looked away. She never finished the conversation. But for the first time since the envelope disappeared, Harry saw something he had not expected. Not confidence, not deception. Fear. And fear he knew from long experience often appeared just before the truth began to surface. By Thursday morning, Brightstone Medical Systems looked less like a healthcare company and more like the headquarters of a political campaign preparing for Election Day. Luxury sedans lined the executive parking area before sunrise. Catering staff wheeled breakfast carts through the lobby. Receptionists checked guest lists twice before allowing visitors onto the executive floor. Every conference room displayed fresh flowers, bottled water, and neatly arranged presentation folders embossed with the Brightstone logo. Reagan arrived shortly after 7. She had slept poorly. Harry noticed the dark circles beneath her eyes before she left the house. You should get some rest tonight, he had said while handing her a travel mug of coffee. She forced a smile. I will. He kissed her forehead. Good luck today? She thanked him quietly before driving away. Neither of them mentioned the envelope. Neither acknowledged the growing distance between them. At Brightstone headquarters, Brandon Ellis stood at the center of the executive conference room, reviewing the final agenda. Tall, perfect posture, confident smile. He greeted each arriving executive with the same practiced warmth Harry had observed weeks earlier at the networking reception. A brief handshake, direct eye contact, a reassuring touch on the elbow, control disguised as charisma. Nicole Harper entered carrying a laptop and several printed binders. We're ready. Brandon nodded. What about Reagan? She's reviewing the Midwest sales projections. Good. He lowered his voice. And the additional material. Nicole hesitated. I think she has it. I didn't ask what you think. Nicole looked toward the hallway before answering. She told me everything was handled. Brandon's expression relaxed only slightly. It needs to stay that way. Across the room, Reagan organized presentation slides without hearing the entire exchange. She noticed Brandon watching her more frequently than usual. Every few minutes, he glanced toward the leather portfolio resting beside her chair. Inside that portfolio sat the cream-colored envelope she had removed from Harry's safe. She had not opened it. She had almost done so twice. Both times she stopped herself. Brandon had been very specific. Don't read it. Just bring it to me. Those instructions bothered her more than she cared to admit. If the documents were legitimate, why couldn't she see them? If they weren't legitimate, why had Brandon insisted they were essential? For the first time since entering Harry's office several nights earlier, Reagan began questioning her own decision. Meanwhile, 25 miles away, Harry sat inside his home office reviewing another client report. At least that was how it appeared. The report remained open on one computer monitor. His attention rested on the secure phone beside his keyboard. At precisely 9:14 a.m., it vibrated. Daniel Brooks. Harry answered immediately. "Morning. We've got movement." Harry remained silent. Daniel continued. "Several federal subpoenas were executed early this morning." Harry understood what that meant. Investigators had officially entered the next phase. "I assume you can't tell me where." "I can't." "Do you expect resistance?" Daniel paused. "We always do." Harry thanked him before ending the call. He leaned back in his chair. The investigation had become public to those directly involved. Corporate executives would soon realize government scrutiny had intensified. People under pressure often made mistakes. Mistakes created evidence. Harry opened the encrypted timeline once again. He added only one sentence. "Federal action initiated. Await secondary responses." He closed the file. There was nothing else to do. Waiting required discipline. At Brightstone, the executive strategy meeting began exactly at 10. PowerPoint slides illuminated the massive projection screen. Revenue projections, regional growth, hospital partnerships, expansion forecasts. Everything looked polished. Everything appeared successful. Brandon controlled the room effortlessly. He answered difficult questions before anyone else could. He complimented department heads. He praised regional teams. He made every executive feel personally responsible for the company's remarkable success. Only Reagan noticed something unusual. His phone never left the conference table. Every few minutes, it vibrated. He ignored most notifications. One message, however, changed his expression almost instantly. His smile faded. Not dramatically, only for a second. But Reagan saw it. Brandon typed a short reply beneath the table, then looked directly toward her portfolio. The meeting continued. At noon, everyone moved into the executive dining room for lunch. Small conversations filled the room. Vice presidents discussed expansion into new markets. Hospital administrators praised Brightstone's recent contracts. No one mentioned subpoenas. Not yet. Brandon approached Reagan while everyone else collected food. "Walk with me." She followed him into a quieter hallway. "Did you bring it?" She hesitated. "Yes." "I'll take it now." Reagan held the portfolio more tightly. "What exactly is inside?" Brandon smiled patiently. "Nothing illegal." "Then why couldn't I look?" "It's confidential." "Confidential to whom?" Brandon's smile disappeared. "Reagan." His voice remained calm. "We've already discussed this." "I know." "Then hand me the envelope." For several seconds, she didn't move. A strange feeling settled inside her stomach. Harry had never lied to her, never manipulated her, never asked her to violate her own conscience. Brandon, on the other hand, had asked her to secretly remove documents from her husband's safe without asking a single question. The contrast suddenly became impossible to ignore. "What if I want to know what I'm carrying?" Reagan asked quietly. Brandon's eyes hardened. "You don't." Before either of them could continue, Nicole hurried into the hallway. "Brandon?" He turned immediately. "What? You need to come back." "Why?" Nicole lowered her voice. "Corporate security says federal agents are downstairs." For the first time since Reagan had known him, Brandon Ellis looked genuinely surprised. Only for an instant. Then his composure returned. "How many?" "I don't know." "What do they want?" "They asked for legal counsel." Brandon inhaled slowly. "Nobody leaves." Nicole nodded. "They've already informed reception." Brandon turned back toward Reagan. The envelope. She stared at him. Now. Instead of handing it over, Reagan asked one simple question. Why? Brandon stepped closer. Because I told you to. She didn't move. His tone had changed completely. The reassuring executive who charmed hospital administrators and board members had vanished. Standing before her now was a man accustomed to obedience, not discussion, not questions. Obedience. Back at the Alexander home, Harry's secure phone rang again. This time, Olivia Grant. He answered. Harry. Olivia. I can't discuss details. I understand. But I can tell you one thing. Harry listened. Understand. But I can tell you one thing. Harry listened carefully. The next few hours may become very uncomfortable for several people. He remained silent. If anyone contacts you asking for help, she paused. Don't destroy anything. I won't. And don't retrieve anything. I won't. Olivia hesitated. I know this is personal. Harry looked toward the family photograph resting beside his computer. 8 years earlier. A beach vacation in South Carolina. Both of them smiling. Both believing the future would be simple. I know, he answered quietly. After ending the call, Harry walked downstairs and stood beside the kitchen window. Rain clouds gathered over the neighborhood. Children played in a nearby yard, completely unaware that across the city federal investigators had begun pulling at threads capable of unraveling an entire corporate fraud network. Harry wasn't thinking about Brandon, or Curtis Vaughn, or the FBI. He was thinking about Reagan. If she still possessed the envelope, she had one final opportunity to make her own decision. She could hand it to Brandon. She could destroy it. Or she could finally ask herself the question Harry had silently hoped she would ask days earlier. Why did Brandon want something that belonged to her husband badly enough to ask her to steal it? Inside Brightstone headquarters, Reagan continued staring at the portfolio in her hands. For the first time since opening Harry's safe, she realized she might not have been helping her company at all. She might have become someone else's evidence. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet certainty began forming. Harry had known, not because he caught her, because he had trusted the truth to reveal itself before he ever spoke a single accusation. Reagan looked down at the leather portfolio as though it had suddenly become much heavier than paper should ever feel. Brandon Ellis extended his hand again. The envelope. His voice remained controlled, but the patience had disappeared. Around them, the executive hallway buzzed with distant conversations and hurried footsteps. Employees moved between conference rooms carrying laptops and presentation binders, completely unaware that only a few feet away, a decision capable of changing several lives was unfolding. Reagan tightened her grip. I want to know what's inside. Brandon took another step forward. I told you that isn't necessary. It is to me. His expression hardened. You agreed to help. I agreed because you said these documents proved someone inside the company was trying to sabotage Brightstone, Brandon answered without hesitation. They do. Then why can't I read them? For the first time, Brandon failed to respond immediately. Nicole Harper watched silently from the doorway. She had worked beside Brandon for nearly 6 years. She recognized the subtle signs that most people missed. His jaw tightened. His shoulders stiffened. He had lost control of the conversation. Before anyone spoke again, another executive hurried into the hallway. Brandon. What now? The federal agents are meeting with legal. Brandon nodded without taking his eyes off Reagan. I'll be there in a minute. The executive disappeared. Brandon lowered his voice. This conversation ends now. It doesn't. Reagan. His tone became almost fatherly. You've built a successful career here. I know. You have a future. I hope so. Then don't make a mistake because you're suddenly feeling guilty. That single word struck her harder than anything else. Guilty. Why should she feel guilty if she had done nothing wrong? The question echoed through her mind. Without another word, Reagan stepped backward. I need some air. She turned and walked toward the women's restroom before Brandon could stop her. Inside, she locked herself into the largest stall. Her hands trembled. Slowly, she removed the cream-colored envelope from the portfolio. She stared at it for nearly 30 seconds. Harry's handwriting appeared nowhere. No labels, no names, nothing. She remembered Brandon's instructions. Don't open it. She remembered Harry's face that morning, calm, kind, completely unaware. Or perhaps, no, she shook the thought away. With careful fingers, she broke the seal. Inside rested several neatly organized reports, vendor payment summaries, financial analyses, expense comparisons. Everything appeared authentic. She flipped through the pages quickly. Nothing seemed shocking, nothing obviously criminal. Then one sheet caught her attention. A tiny line of text appeared in the lower right corner. Property copy reference 17C. She frowned. Another page, reference 17D. Another, reference 17E. Who numbered confidential evidence like that? She continued reading. The reports contained no confidential Brightstone information. Most numbers were months old. Several charts summarized publicly available financial data. None of it justified stealing documents from her husband's safe. Confusion slowly replaced anxiety. What did I do? She whispered. Across town, Harry's secure phone vibrated. Daniel Brooks. Harry answered immediately. We found them. Harry remained silent. The documents. His heartbeat stayed steady. Where? I can't tell you. I understand, Daniel continued. They're exactly where you expected them to surface. Harry closed his eyes briefly. And? We're verifying them. Harry smiled faintly. You'll discover their copies. Daniel paused. You expected us to. I hoped you would. Another silence followed. Daniel finally asked the question he had wanted to ask for weeks. Did you prepare those documents specifically for this? Harry answered carefully. I prepared them in case someone chose to remove them. There's a difference. Yes. There is. Daniel almost laughed. Every page contains identifiers. It does. We've already found them. Harry looked out his office window. Autumn leaves drifted slowly across the backyard. The chain of custody matters now. It does. Daniel's voice became serious again. Harry. Yes. You've just made several prosecutors extremely happy. The call ended. Harry leaned back in his chair. For the first time since Reagan opened the safe, he allowed himself a long breath. The envelope had completed its journey. Now the evidence belonged to investigators, not him. Inside Brightstone headquarters, Brandon paced outside the conference room. Nicole approached cautiously. She still hasn't come out? No. What if she opened it? Brandon stopped walking. I told her not to. Nicole hesitated. That wasn't my question. Brandon stared toward the restroom entrance. If she opened it... His sentence remained unfinished. A minute later, Reagan emerged, carrying the portfolio. Her face looked pale. Brandon reached toward the envelope. Give it to me. Instead, she handed him the opened flap. His eyes widened immediately. You opened it? Yes. You lied to me. His expression changed instantly. I did no such thing. You said those papers contained evidence against someone inside Brightstone. They do? No. She shook her head. They're mostly public documents. Brandon snatched the envelope from her hands. He quickly examined several pages. A tiny crease formed between his eyebrows. Something wasn't right. He flipped faster. Another page. Another. No confidential reimbursement files. No hidden contracts. No executive correspondence. Nothing. His breathing slowed. Then he noticed the microscopic reference number printed at the bottom of one sheet. His face lost all color. He understood. Someone had expected the documents to be stolen. Someone had marked every page. Someone had anticipated him. For the first time in years, Brandon Ellis realized he had not been directing the game. He had been playing inside someone else's. "Where did you get these?" he asked quietly. Reagan stared at him in disbelief. "My husband's safe." "When?" "3 nights ago." Brandon closed the envelope immediately. "We're leaving." "I'm not." He grabbed her wrist. She pulled away. "I'm done." At that exact moment, 2 men wearing dark business suits entered the hallway. Neither displayed weapons. Neither raised his voice. One carried a leather identification wallet. "Mr. Brandon Ellis." The hallway fell silent. Brandon turned slowly. "Yes." "We're with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Several executives froze where they stood. Employees stopped walking. Conversation ended mid-sentence. The taller agent continued politely. "We'd appreciate a few minutes of your time." Brandon forced a smile. "Of course." He glanced briefly towards the envelope still in his hands. Too late. One of the agents had already noticed it. "Would you mind bringing those documents as well?" Brandon hesitated only a fraction of a second. Then he nodded. "Certainly." Reagan watched everything without moving. The agents escorted Brandon toward a nearby conference room where corporate counsel already waited. Nicole remained standing in the hallway. Neither woman spoke. Neither knew exactly what had just happened. Only that something irreversible had begun. An hour later, Harry received one final call, this time from Olivia Grant. "They found the identifiers." "I expected they would." "They also documented how the documents arrived." Harry nodded quietly. "Good." Olivia paused. "I want you to understand something." "I'm listening." "Your copies didn't prove fraud." "I know." "They proved movement." Harry smiled faintly. "Exactly." "And movement established intent." "Exactly." She laughed softly. "You always did think 3 steps ahead." After ending the call, Harry closed his laptop and walked outside. The afternoon sun hung low above the neighborhood. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalk. A neighbor trimmed hedges across the street. Life continued with remarkable indifference. Harry stood on the front porch for several minutes. The investigation no longer depended on him. The envelope had done exactly what he designed it to do: not expose guilt, reveal choices. And sometimes Harry knew better than almost anyone a person's choices told investigators far more than the documents they believed they were stealing ever could. The conference room door closed quietly behind Brandon Ellis. Outside, the executive hallway remained frozen in uneasy silence. Employees pretended to return to work, but almost every pair of eyes followed the 2 FBI agents who had escorted Brightstone's chief financial officer away from the executive floor. Conversations resumed only in whispers. What happened? Is this an audit? Did someone call the government? No one knew. Inside the conference room, Brandon sat across from Special Agent Daniel Brooks and another investigator from the Financial Crimes Division. Corporate counsel occupied one side of the table. Assistant United States Attorney Olivia Grant entered moments later, carrying a thin legal folder. She greeted everyone professionally before taking her seat. Daniel placed the cream-colored envelope in the center of the table. "We'd like to begin with this." Brandon glanced at it only briefly. "I've never seen those documents before today." Daniel nodded. "We expected that answer." Olivia opened her folder. "Our conversation today concerns the movement of corporate information, reimbursement approvals, vendor relationships, and communications involving several shell companies." Brandon remained calm. "I'll cooperate fully." Daniel slid the envelope toward him. Then perhaps you can explain why you requested these papers from one of your employees. Brandon didn't react. I requested no such thing. Across the table, Daniel quietly pressed a button on a digital recorder. Noted. The interview had officially begun. Several floors above Reagan sat alone inside an unused conference room. She had surrendered her company identification badge after Human Resources requested that she remain available until investigators completed several interviews. Nobody had accused her of a crime. Nobody had placed her under arrest. Yet she felt as though the walls themselves had begun closing around her. Every decision from the previous month replayed endlessly inside her mind. The late-night conversations with Brandon, the pressure, the secrecy, the stolen envelope. Most painful of all was Harry's face that morning. Kind, patient, trusting, or perhaps... She closed her eyes. No. He had known. Not every detail. But enough. Enough to leave copies instead of originals. Enough to prepare for someone opening the safe. Enough to let her make her own decision. That realization hurt more than any accusation ever could. Meanwhile, Harry received another unexpected visitor. Michael Donnelly arrived at his house shortly after 3 in the afternoon. Harry welcomed him inside. Neither man rushed into conversation. Michael accepted a cup of coffee before sitting across from Harry in the living room. "So," the attorney finally said. "So, I assume Daniel called?" "He did." Michael nodded slowly. "And the documents surfaced." Exactly where you predicted." Harry looked toward the backyard. "I didn't predict." Michael smiled. "You prepared." Harry didn't answer. After a long silence, Michael asked the question neither of them had discussed before. "What are you going to do about Reagan?" Harry leaned back. "I don't know yet." "You still love her?" Harry stared into his coffee. "That's not the question. What is whether the woman I loved still exists?" Michael had no immediate answer. Sometimes lawyers understood that silence carried greater value than advice. Back inside Brightstone headquarters, Nicole Harper completed nearly 2 hours of questioning. She answered every inquiry truthfully. Meeting schedules, email chains, vendor approvals, budget meetings, nothing she described directly implicated Brandon. But patterns slowly emerged. Repeated meetings with the same vendors, repeated emergency reimbursements, repeated requests to bypass ordinary accounting procedures. When Daniel asked one final question, Nicole hesitated. Did Brandon ever ask employees to obtain information unrelated to their normal responsibilities? Nicole looked down, then slowly nodded. Yes. Can you explain? She swallowed hard. He sometimes asked people to collect background information. About competitors. Sometimes. Who else? She looked toward the closed conference room door, where Brandon remained under questioning. Employees. Daniel remained silent, she continued, and spouses. Meanwhile, Reagan waited outside Olivia Grant's temporary interview room. An assistant opened the door. "Ms. Alexander." Reagan stood. Olivia greeted her with a calm expression. "Please come in." Unlike Brandon's interview, this room contained only 2 people. No agents, no corporate attorneys. Just Olivia. "Would you like some water?" "Please." After Reagan sat down, Olivia placed a recorder on the table. "You are not under arrest." "I understand." "You are free to leave at any time." "I understand." Olivia waited until Reagan nodded. "Can you tell me how you came into possession of the envelope?" The question arrived gently, without accusation. Reagan stared at the table. For almost 30 seconds she said nothing. Then tears quietly filled her eyes. "I took it." Olivia remained silent. "No one forced me." Another pause. "I opened my husband's safe." She covered her face briefly. I thought I was helping the company. Olivia handed her a tissue. What made you believe that? Brandon? What exactly did he tell you? Reagan slowly described every conversation, every request, every assurance that the documents would protect Brightstone from internal sabotage, every instruction not to open the envelope. Olivia listened carefully without interruption. When Reagan finished, the prosecutor asked only one final question. Did your husband know? Reagan laughed softly through her tears. I think... She paused. I think he knew long before I did. Late that evening, Harry's front door opened. Reagan stepped inside quietly. She looked exhausted. Neither of them spoke for several moments. The silence felt unfamiliar, not hostile, just heavy. Harry stood from the living room chair. You've had a difficult day. She nodded. I have. He gestured toward the kitchen. I made soup. Her eyes filled again. You still cooked dinner? I wasn't sure if you'd eaten. She sat at the kitchen table while Harry warmed 2 bowls. The ordinary routine somehow made everything harder. Finally, Reagan whispered the words she had carried all day. You knew. Harry placed the soup in front of her. I suspected. You knew I'd opened the safe. I knew someone had. She looked directly at him. Why didn't you stop me? Harry sat across the table. Because if I stopped you, he spoke quietly, I would never know why you chose to do it. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. I betrayed you. You made a decision. I stole from you. You did. I don't deserve this. Harry looked at the woman sitting across from him, the same woman who once celebrated his smallest accomplishments, the same woman who now struggled even to meet his eyes. I never wanted to prove you were a thief. She frowned. I wanted to know whether someone had convinced you to become one. She lowered her head. I'm sorry. Harry believed her. Not because she cried, not because she apologized, because the first thing she had done after speaking with investigators was come home, not to defend herself, not to invent excuses, simply to tell the truth. That didn't erase what she had done. Trust once broken never returned overnight. Some fractures never healed completely, but truth Harry knew from years investigating financial crimes always represented the first step toward whatever came next. Outside darkness settled over the quiet neighborhood. Inside the Alexander home, 2 bowls of soup slowly grew cold as a husband and wife sat across from one another with nothing left to hide. The criminal investigation had finally begun. Now another far more personal reckoning awaited them both. Neither Harry nor Reagan touched the soup for several minutes. Steam slowly disappeared from the bowls between them. The kitchen clock ticked softly against the otherwise silent room. For years, silence inside their home had been comfortable. It had never required explanation. Harry often worked through complicated financial reports without speaking for an hour, while Reagan answered emails from the dining table. They had learned to appreciate quiet together. Tonight, silence carried an entirely different meaning. Reagan finally lifted her eyes. I told the truth. Harry nodded. I assumed you would. You assumed... I hoped. She looked at him with disbelief. After everything I did... Harry folded his hands on the table. I've spent most of my career investigating financial fraud. I know. The people who plan crimes usually defend themselves immediately. He paused. The people who realize they've made terrible mistakes usually begin by telling the truth. Fresh tears appeared in Reagan's eyes. I don't know if that makes me feel better or worse. It wasn't meant to do either. He wasn't trying to comfort her. He wasn't trying to punish her. He was simply describing what years of experience had taught him. Reagan took a slow breath. I need you to know something. Harry waited. I never wanted money. I know. I never wanted your documents. I know. I honestly believed Brandon. Harry looked at her carefully. Tell me why. She stared into the cooling soup before answering. He said someone inside the company had been leaking information. Harry remained silent. He said your consulting background meant you probably collected financial records from former clients. I never discussed client information with you. I know. He said if those papers reached the wrong people, hundreds of jobs could disappear. Harry listened without interruption. He made it sound like protecting the company. She closed her eyes. I convinced myself that one dishonest decision would prevent something much worse. Harry had heard similar explanations before, not from violent criminals, not from hardened fraudsters, from ordinary accountants, managers, administrative assistants, people who crossed ethical lines one careful step at a time until they no longer recognized themselves. He spoke quietly. That's how manipulation works. She looked up. They never begin by asking for a crime. Harry continued. They begin by asking for loyalty. Reagan covered her mouth. I was so stupid. Harry gently shook his head. You were manipulated. She immediately answered. I still made the choice. He nodded. Yes. Neither statement contradicted the other. Both were true. Later that evening, Reagan walked upstairs toward Harry's office. She stopped outside the doorway. The safe remained hidden behind the framed landscape painting, exactly where it had always been. She remembered standing in this room only days earlier, her heart racing, her hands shaking, convinced she was doing something necessary. Now the memory felt unbearable. Harry joined her quietly in the hallway. She didn't turn around. I don't think I can ever walk into this room the same way again. Harry understood. He looked towards the painting. I bought that safe after my first federal consulting case. She glanced at him. I know. I didn't buy it because I expected strangers to steal from me. He smiled sadly. I bought it because I believed home should be the safest place to keep important things. Reagan closed her eyes. I'm sorry. Harry didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked into the office and removed the painting from the wall. The steel safe sat exposed. He entered the combination, opened the heavy door. The shelves inside looked almost empty. Only family keepsakes remained. His father's watch, several old passports, photo albums. Harry reached inside and removed the watch. He handed it to Reagan. She frowned. What are you doing? My father gave this to me before he died. She carefully accepted it. He trusted me with it. Harry met her eyes. Trust isn't built because valuable things stay locked away. He gently closed the safe. It's built because people choose not to take them. The words struck Reagan harder than anger ever could. She carefully returned the watch. Harry locked the safe once more. Then, without another word, he spun the combination several times until the numbers disappeared. The next morning, federal agents returned to Brightstone headquarters. Search warrants authorized investigators to collect financial servers, reimbursement records, procurement contracts, and executive communications. Employees watched technicians disconnect computer equipment from several offices. News of the investigation spread quickly through Chicago's healthcare business community. Reporters gathered outside the corporate headquarters before noon. Inside one conference room, Daniel Brooks reviewed preliminary interview summaries with Olivia Grant. The timelines line up, Daniel said. Olivia nodded. So do the vendor payments. Daniel pointed toward several highlighted pages. Nicole corroborated multiple conversations. And Reagan? Daniel handed over another interview summary. Consistent. Olivia finished reading. No attempts to minimize her own conduct. None. Daniel leaned back. She admitted entering the safe before we even asked about fingerprints. Olivia quietly closed the file. That matters. Daniel understood. Investigators valued truthful cooperation, not because it erased misconduct, because it demonstrated credibility moving forward. Another agent entered, carrying fresh forensic results. "We've confirmed the document markers." Daniel accepted the report. "Anything unexpected?" "Actually," the agent flipped through several pages. "The envelope never stopped with Brandon." Daniel looked up immediately. "What do you mean?" "Forensic traces indicate someone else handled the documents after Reagan removed them." Olivia leaned forward. "Who?" "We're still processing the evidence." Daniel studied the report carefully. "There are additional fingerprints." The room became quiet. The envelope's journey wasn't over after all. Someone else had touched it. Someone investigators hadn't yet identified. Back at the Alexander home, Harry spent the afternoon organizing old consulting files, not because investigators requested them, because routine helped him think clearly. Around 3 o'clock, his phone rang. "Daniel, we've identified additional handling." Harry remained silent. The envelope passed through another person. Harry considered the implication. So Brandon wasn't the final destination. "It appears not." Harry walked toward the window. "Then whoever requested it may still be unknown." Daniel answered carefully. "Possibly." Harry thought about Curtis Vaughn, the shell vendors, the procurement network. Someone had always seemed to operate one layer above Brandon. Perhaps they were finally approaching that person. Before ending the call, Daniel asked one unexpected question. "How's Reagan?" Harry looked upstairs toward his bedroom. "Honest?" Daniel smiled softly. "That's a good beginning." "It is." "But it isn't the end." "No." After the call ended, Harry found Reagan sitting on the back patio wrapped in a light sweater, despite the cool afternoon air. She stared at the falling leaves without speaking. He carried 2 cups of coffee outside. She accepted one quietly. "Thank you." They sat together. Several minutes passed before Reagan spoke. "Do you think people will always see me as the woman who stole from her husband?" Harry answered honestly. "Some will." She nodded sadly. "I probably deserve that." "Maybe." She looked at him. "But the people who matter most," Harry continued, "will judge what you do next." She held the warm coffee cup between both hands. "I don't know how to fix this." Harry watched another leaf drift across the yard. "You don't fix trust." She frowned. "You rebuild it." "How?" "One truthful decision at a time." The answer sounded almost too simple. Yet both of them understood it would be the hardest work either had ever attempted. Neither marriage nor reputation could be repaired in a single conversation. Neither could survive without many more conversations like this one. As the sun slowly disappeared behind the trees, Harry realized the criminal investigation had entered a new phase. So had their marriage. One would be decided inside federal courtrooms. The other would be decided inside ordinary moments, quiet choices, and difficult truths shared across kitchen tables long after the headlines disappeared. 3 days later, the first major news story appeared. The headline spread across Chicago's business publications before sunrise. Federal investigation expands into Brightstone Medical Systems procurement practices. The article contained few details, no arrests, no formal charges, only confirmation that federal investigators had executed search warrants and requested extensive financial records from multiple healthcare vendors. Harry read the article once before setting his tablet aside. Nothing inside surprised him. Investigations rarely unfolded dramatically. Most were built quietly, document by document, interview by interview. Public attention usually arrived long before prosecutors reached final conclusions. Reagan read the same article from the opposite side of the kitchen table. She placed her phone down slowly. "My name isn't there." Harry nodded. "Not today." She looked relieved. then guilty for feeling relieved. I keep thinking someone will knock on the door. They might. She met his eyes. You really think so? Harry answered honestly. If investigators need more information, they'll ask. She lowered her voice. And if they think I committed a crime, they'll ask that too. The answer wasn't comforting. It wasn't meant to be. Honesty had become the only language either of them trusted anymore. Later that morning, Reagan received a call from Brightstone's Human Resources Department. Her administrative leave would continue until the company completed its internal review. The representative remained polite, professional, emotionally distant. When the call ended, Reagan quietly placed her work laptop inside its carrying case. She stared at it for several moments. 8 years. 8 years of promotions, late nights, business travel, and executive meetings. Everything had stopped with a single phone call. Harry watched from across the room. He said nothing. Some losses required silence more than reassurance. That afternoon, Daniel Brooks met Olivia Grant inside the temporary evidence review office established near the Chicago Field Division. Stacks of banker boxes lined the walls. Hard drives waited for forensic imaging. Whiteboards displayed timelines connecting vendors, executives, and reimbursement approvals. Daniel entered carrying another report. We identified the additional fingerprints. Olivia looked up. And they belonged to Curtis Vaughn. Olivia immediately stood. You're certain? Daniel handed her the forensic summary. The envelope moved from Reagan to Brandon. He pointed toward the chain of custody diagram. Then from Brandon to Vaughn. Olivia studied the report carefully. So Brandon wasn't collecting evidence? No. He was delivering it. Daniel nodded. Exactly. The discovery changed the investigation. Until now, Brandon Ellis appeared to be directing the operation. Now investigators believed someone outside Brightstone exercised even greater influence. Curtis Vaughn, the quiet financial controller whose name had repeatedly surfaced among shell vendors. Olivia smiled slightly. The trail keeps climbing. Meanwhile, Nicole Harper sat alone inside her apartment, staring at a resignation letter she had rewritten 6 times. She no longer knew whether leaving Brightstone represented courage or panic. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Hello? A familiar voice responded. Nicole? Her heart sank. Brandon. They let you make phone calls. I'm not under arrest. She remained silent. I need your help. No. You don't even know what I'm asking. I don't care. Brandon's voice hardened. You owe me. Nicole laughed bitterly. I owe you. I made your career. No. She looked around her empty apartment. I built my career. You'll lose everything if you cooperate. Nicole closed her eyes. I already lost everything when I stopped trusting myself. She ended the call before he could answer. Across town, Harry received an invitation from Michael Donnelly to meet for lunch. They chose a quiet restaurant overlooking the DuPage River. After ordering sandwiches, Michael leaned forward. I've been thinking about your case. Harry smiled. It isn't my case. It became personal the moment someone entered your home. Harry accepted the correction. Fair enough. Michael stirred his coffee. I've represented people going through financial betrayal. Harry listened. Business partners. Siblings. Married couples. He paused. The legal problems eventually end. Harry looked out the window. And the personal ones. Michael sighed. Those depend entirely on whether both people continue choosing honesty after the crisis ends. Harry understood. During the investigation, telling the truth became almost unavoidable. The real test began later when nobody required honesty anymore. Back home that evening, Reagan carried a cardboard box downstairs. Harry recognized it immediately. Everything from her Brightstone office, family photographs, awards, coffee mug, business cards, several framed certificates. She placed the box beside the dining room table. "I don't want to hide it." Harry nodded. "You shouldn't." She removed one framed photograph. The executive leadership team, everyone smiling. Brandon stood directly beside her. She looked at the picture for several seconds before quietly placing it face down. "I don't even recognize that version of myself," Harry answered gently. "I think you do." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "You recognize the person." He chose his words carefully. "You just don't recognize the choices she eventually made." Reagan thought about that for a long time. The ambitious employee, the rising executive, the woman who desperately wanted approval from senior leadership. She hadn't changed overnight. She had changed gradually, one compromise, one rationalization, one unquestioned request at a time. The realization frightened her because it meant ordinary people didn't suddenly become dishonest. They simply stopped noticing the small decisions leading there. The next morning, Harry received another secure message from Olivia Grant requesting a brief meeting. They met inside the federal building. No courtroom, no formal interview, just a quiet office overlooking downtown Chicago. Olivia closed the door. "I wanted to thank you." Harry looked surprised. "For what? You handled this correctly." "I tried." She smiled. "Most people don't." Harry remained silent. "They either confront the suspect immediately," she held up one finger, "or they secretly retaliate." Another finger. "Or they destroy evidence because emotions take over." She lowered her hand. "You did none of those." Harry looked toward the window. "I almost confronted her." "But you didn't." "No." Olivia folded a file closed. "That restraint protected the investigation." She paused. "It may also have protected your marriage." Harry wasn't certain of that. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps not. Some wounds remained too fresh to measure. Before he left, Olivia handed him a small business card. "My personal number." Harry accepted it. "If Reagan needs legal guidance as a cooperating witness." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Harry understood. When he returned home, he found Reagan sitting in the living room reading a notebook. His notebook. The timeline. She looked embarrassed. "I shouldn't have opened it." Harry smiled faintly. "This time I left it where you could find it." She looked down at the pages. Every entry remained factual. No insults, no angry observations, no accusations. Only dates, times, events. She stopped at one particular line. Subject returned to bedroom. Observed verbal reference. Brandon. Reagan closed the notebook slowly. "You never once wrote that you hated me." Harry sat beside her. "Hate isn't useful." "No. No." He looked toward the window where evening light filled the room. "Understanding is." She rested the notebook on her lap. "I finally understand something." "What?" "The safe wasn't the most valuable thing in our house." Harry waited. "Our marriage was." She reached for his hand carefully. "And I almost stole that too." Harry didn't answer immediately. Instead, he quietly held her hand. The trust between them remained fragile. The future remained uncertain. The criminal investigation still had months to go, but for the first time since the night Reagan opened the safe, both of them were no longer hiding behind separate versions of the truth. They were finally standing inside the same one. 2 months passed before the federal investigation reached its next turning point. Autumn faded into early winter across the Chicago suburbs. Bare trees lined the streets of Naperville, and the first light snow dusted rooftops one quiet Saturday morning. Life inside the Alexander home settled into an unfamiliar rhythm. Nothing returned to normal. Instead, something slower began taking shape. Every Friday evening, Harry and Reagan sat together at the kitchen table, without phones, television, or distractions. They talked for 1 hour. Sometimes they discussed practical matters, household bills, groceries, medical appointments. Sometimes they discussed things that had remained unspoken for years: work, ambition, fear, expectations. Their conversations were not easy, but they were honest. Harry noticed something important. Whenever Reagan did not know an answer, she no longer invented one. She simply said, "I don't know." That small change mattered more than dramatic promises ever could. One Friday evening, she looked across the table. "I've been thinking about something." Harry nodded. "What?" "The night I opened the safe." He remained quiet. "I keep asking myself why I never came to you first." Harry considered the question. "Have you found an answer?" She nodded slowly. "I was afraid." "Of me?" "No." She looked down. "I was afraid that if I asked you directly, you would tell me Brandon was wrong." Harry waited. "And then I'd have to choose who I believed." The admission carried painful honesty. Harry understood it immediately. People rarely avoided difficult conversations because they expected lies. Often they avoided them because they feared hearing inconvenient truths. "You trusted the wrong person," Harry said gently. "I did." "And before that?" He paused. "So, you stopped trusting the right one." Reagan quietly nodded. Meanwhile, Daniel Brooks stood inside a federal courtroom preparing documents for a grand jury presentation. Months of investigation had transformed isolated suspicions into organized evidence: bank records, vendor contracts, electronic communications, financial transfers, employee testimony. Most importantly, investigators now understood the complete structure of the procurement fraud scheme. Curtis Vaughn had established shell vendors. Brandon Ellis approved inflated payments. Several outside contractors submitted fraudulent invoices. Money moved through consulting agreements before disappearing into offshore accounts. Brightstone itself had not been created to commit fraud. Rather, several executives had quietly exploited legitimate corporate systems for personal enrichment. Daniel handed another folder to Olivia Grant. "Everything's ready." Olivia reviewed the final witness list. "Nicole." Daniel nodded. "Confirmed." "Accounting supervisor." "Confirmed." "Procurement manager." "Confirmed." She looked toward the final name. "Reagan Alexander." Daniel remained silent. Olivia closed the folder. "I never expected her testimony would become this important." Daniel answered thoughtfully. "Neither did she." A week later, Reagan entered the federal courthouse carrying nothing except a notebook and identification. Harry waited beside the security entrance. He had insisted on driving her. Neither spoke much during the trip downtown. Before entering the building, Reagan turned toward him. "You don't have to stay." Harry smiled softly. "I know. You probably have better things to do." "I do." She looked confused. "Being here is one of them." For several seconds, she simply looked at him. Then she walked inside. Harry remained in the lobby reading while witnesses entered and exited various conference rooms throughout the morning. Around noon, Daniel approached him. "You've been patient." Harry smiled. "I've had practice." Daniel laughed quietly. "She did well." Harry didn't ask what she had said. He trusted that if Reagan wanted to share it, she would. That evening, she did. Over dinner, she explained every question investigators asked, every answer she gave, every mistake she admitted. When she finished, Harry asked only one question. "Did you tell the whole truth?" "Yes." He nodded. "Then whatever happens next." He reached for his coffee. "None. You'll be able to live with yourself." She realized something profound in that moment. For weeks, she had worried about legal consequences, career consequences, financial consequences. Harry had focused on something entirely different: whether she could honestly live with the person she became. 3 weeks later, indictments were unsealed. Federal prosecutors charged Curtis Vaughn, Brandon Ellis, and 3 outside contractors with conspiracy wire fraud and healthcare-related financial offenses. News stations covered the story throughout the day. One reporter stood outside Brightstone headquarters explaining that investigators believed millions of dollars had been diverted through fraudulent vendor contracts over several years. Brightstone's board issued a public statement announcing complete cooperation with federal authorities and sweeping governance reforms. Several senior executives resigned. New compliance officers arrived. Independent auditors reviewed procurement procedures dating back nearly 5 years. Harry watched the afternoon news without satisfaction. Justice never felt exciting after witnessing the human cost surrounding it. Reagan sat beside him. "My picture isn't on television." "No." "My name isn't mentioned." "No." She exhaled slowly. "I never realized how close I came." Harry looked at her. "You came close." She nodded. "Too close." Several days later, Nicole Harper visited the Alexander home carrying a small gift basket. She looked nervous standing on the front porch. Reagan opened the door. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." Reagan hesitated only briefly before inviting her inside. The afternoon became one of the most uncomfortable conversations either woman had ever experienced. Nicole apologized for remaining silent, for ignoring warning signs, for encouraging Brandon's authority. Reagan apologized for recruiting herself into Brandon's plan without questioning it. Neither woman attempted to excuse her decisions. Neither blamed the other. When Nicole prepared to leave, she turned toward Harry. "I owe you an apology, too." Harry looked surprised. "You don't. I judged you." She smiled sadly. "I thought you were just a quiet husband who didn't understand business." Harry chuckled softly. "I've been underestimated before." Nicole laughed for the first time in months. "I imagine you have." As the front door closed behind her, Reagan looked toward Harry. "People really had no idea what you did." Harry shrugged. "I preferred it that way." Winter settled fully over Illinois. Christmas lights appeared throughout the neighborhood. One Saturday afternoon, Harry carried several storage boxes from the basement. Inside one box, Reagan discovered an old scrapbook. Their honeymoon, camping trips, birthday celebrations, photographs from years before promotions, investigations, and hidden envelopes complicated their lives. She stopped at one picture taken beside Lake Michigan. Harry wore jeans and an old university sweatshirt. She laughed quietly. "I forgot you had that ridiculous haircut." Harry smiled. "It was fashionable." It absolutely wasn't. For the first time in months, laughter filled the house without hesitation. It lasted only a few seconds, yet both of them noticed it. Healing hadn't arrived all at once. It had appeared unexpectedly inside an ordinary moment. Later that evening, Harry returned the scrapbook to its box. He looked toward the office upstairs, where the safe remained, behind the familiar landscape painting. Reagan noticed. "You still use it?" "Yes." She nodded. "I don't blame you." Harry thought for a moment. "It isn't because I distrust you." She looked surprised. "Then why?" "Because everyone needs a secure place for important things." He smiled gently. "The difference now is that I know the most important things can't be locked inside steel." She walked beside him. "What are they locked inside?" Harry reached for her hand. "They're protected by the choices we make every day." Outside, snow continued falling quietly across the neighborhood. Inside, the investigation that began with one opened safe had finally uncovered a much larger crime. More importantly, it had revealed something neither Harry nor Reagan expected. Evidence could expose financial fraud. But only truth, patiently chosen again and again, could restore the fragile trust between two people determined not to lose each other a second time. Spring arrived nearly a year after the night Reagan opened Harry's safe. The maple tree in the Alexanders' front yard had begun growing new leaves, and the neighborhood looked brighter than it had in months. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalks again. Lawns turned green, windows opened to let fresh air into homes that had spent an entire winter closed against the cold. Life had continued moving forward. The investigation had done the same. Harry parked outside the Everett M. Dirksen Federal Courthouse just before 8 o'clock on a clear Monday morning. Today was different. Today marked the beginning of Brandon Ellis's trial. He wasn't attending as a witness. His testimony had already been preserved months earlier. Instead, he attended because Daniel Brooks had invited him to observe part of the proceedings from the public gallery if he wished. Harry had accepted. Not because he wanted revenge, he wanted closure. Reagan asked to come with him. "You don't have to," Harry told her before they left home. "I know. It won't be easy. I know. You may hear things that are uncomfortable." She looked directly at him. "I've spent the last year living with uncomfortable truths." He quietly nodded. Together they entered the courthouse. Inside the courtroom, reporters filled several rows near the back. Attorneys arranged exhibits while court staff prepared electronic displays for financial records that would eventually be presented to the jury. Curtis Vaughn sat beside Brandon at the defense table. Harry noticed something immediately. Neither man looked confident anymore. Gone were the expensive smiles. Gone was the effortless authority. Months of investigation had replaced certainty with exhaustion. Daniel Brooks quietly approached Harry before proceedings began. "I'm glad you came." Harry smiled politely. "So am I." Daniel glanced toward Reagan. "How are you holding up?" She answered honestly. "Better than I expected." Daniel nodded. "That's good." Before he returned to the prosecution table, he looked at Harry one last time. "Your copies are still one of my favorite pieces of evidence." Harry laughed softly. "They weren't even the important evidence." "No," Daniel smiled, "but they showed us exactly where to look." The courtroom soon came to order. During opening statements, prosecutors carefully outlined the conspiracy. They did not exaggerate. They did not dramatize. Instead, they built a straightforward timeline, supported by documents, electronic records, bank transfers, and witness testimony. Harry appreciated that. Real financial investigations rarely depended upon dramatic confessions. They depended upon consistency. Every document confirmed another document. Every email supported another timeline. Every witness filled another gap. Late that afternoon, Nicole Harper testified. She spoke calmly, clearly. She accepted responsibility for remaining silent when she should have questioned suspicious requests. The prosecutor asked, "Why didn't you report your concerns earlier?" Nicole answered without hesitation. "Because I confused loyalty with integrity." The courtroom remained silent. Harry glanced toward Reagan. She had heard those words differently than anyone else inside the room. She quietly lowered her eyes. The following day, Reagan herself testified. Harry waited outside the courtroom. He did not want her worrying about his reactions while answering questions. For nearly 3 hours, she described exactly what happened. The late conversations, the growing pressure, the request to retrieve documents, opening Harry's safe, delivering the envelope, opening it herself. Her cooperation with investigators. Defense attorneys attempted to portray her as someone acting independently. She refused to accept that version of events. "I made my own decision," she testified. "But I made it because I allowed someone else to manipulate my judgment." The attorney asked, "So you're blaming Mr. Ellis?" "No." Reagan's voice remained steady. "I'm describing what happened." When she finally left the witness stand, she found Harry waiting quietly in the hallway. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered. He smiled. "I was going to ask if you'd like lunch." She laughed through tired eyes. "That sounds wonderful." It was the simplest conversation they had shared in days, and perhaps the healthiest. Several weeks later, the jury returned its verdict. Brandon Ellis was convicted on multiple federal fraud and conspiracy charges. Curtis Vaughn was convicted on every major count presented. The remaining defendants had already entered guilty pleas earlier in the proceedings. Outside the courthouse, reporters rushed toward prosecutors. Cameras flashed. Questions echoed through the plaza. Harry and Reagan slipped quietly toward the parking garage instead. Neither wanted interviews. Neither wanted public attention. As they reached the elevator, someone called Harry's name. He turned. Brandon stood several yards away, under the supervision of U.S. Marshals. His attorney stood beside him. For a brief moment, the marshals allowed Brandon to approach. He stopped several feet from Harry. "I owe you something." Harry waited. An apology. Reagan remained silent beside her husband. Brandon looked directly at Harry. "I underestimated you," Harry answered calmly. "That wasn't your biggest mistake." Brandon gave a tired smile. "No, it wasn't." He looked toward Reagan. I'm sorry for involving you." She held his gaze. "I should have said no." Brandon nodded once. "You should have." The marshal gently signaled that time was over. Before leaving, Brandon turned back toward Harry one final time. "You know what bothers me most?" Harry didn't answer. "I thought intelligence guaranteed control." Harry replied quietly. "It never does." Brandon frowned. "What does—" Harry looked toward Reagan before answering. "Character." The marshals escorted Brandon away. Neither Harry nor Reagan watched him leave. Some ending did not require witnesses. Months later, Brightstone Medical Systems announced sweeping reforms, independent oversight, new compliance leadership, mandatory ethics reporting, enhanced financial controls. The company survived, smaller than before, more cautious, perhaps healthier. Nicole accepted a position with a non-profit hospital network dedicated to improving financial transparency in healthcare systems. Daniel Brooks received a commendation for leading the investigation. Olivia Grant continued prosecuting complex financial crime cases across the district. Michael Donnelly occasionally joined Harry for lunch, where they discussed everything except legal cases. Life slowly became ordinary again. One Saturday afternoon, Harry finally entered his office carrying a small toolbox. Reagan watched from the hallway. "What are you doing?" "I'm replacing the safe." She looked surprised. "Replacing it?" He nodded. "The lock mechanism is getting old." She quietly stepped inside the office. "I wasn't sure you'd ever let me in here again." Harry smiled. "I was wondering when you'd come." Together they removed the old safe from the wall. It felt strangely symbolic, not because the steel box had failed, because the chapter connected to it had finally ended. The new safe looked almost identical. Harry installed it carefully before testing the combination several times. When he finished, Reagan asked softly, "Are you going to tell me the combination?" Harry looked at her. Then, without hesitation, he turned the dial toward her. "Set it." She stared at him in disbelief. "You want me to choose it?" "Yes." Her hands trembled slightly as she selected 6 numbers neither of them would ever forget. The date of their wedding. Harry memorized the sequence without writing it down. He closed the heavy door, locked it, then stepped back. Neither of them spoke. They both understood what had just happened. Trust had not magically returned because time had passed. It had returned because hundreds of ordinary choices had slowly rebuilt what one terrible night nearly destroyed. Harry wrapped an arm around Reagan's shoulders. She leaned gently against him. The safe remained locked. The documents inside remained protected. But the most valuable thing in the room no longer sat behind reinforced steel. It stood beside it. 2 imperfect people who had learned that love alone was never enough to protect a marriage. Trust had to be guarded. Honesty had to be practiced. And sometimes the greatest evidence anyone could leave behind was not proof that another person had failed, but proof that forgiveness once earned through truth and accountability could become stronger than betrayal itself. 5 years later, the story most people remembered was not the one that had actually happened. Some remembered reading newspaper headlines about healthcare fraud. Others vaguely recalled that a corporate executive had gone to prison after a federal investigation uncovered fraudulent vendor contracts. Very few people remembered the name Brandon Ellis. Even fewer remembered Curtis Vaughn. Time had done what time always does. It had reduced extraordinary events into brief memories. For Harry Alexander, however, one particular night remained perfectly clear. 2:17 in the morning. The quiet click of a safe opening. A woman he loved standing in his office. The decision to keep his eyes closed. He sometimes wondered what would have happened if he had spoken that night. If he had walked into the office. If he had demanded an explanation. If anger had replaced patience. He always reached the same conclusion. They would have learned much less than they eventually did. Not only about the criminal conspiracy, about themselves. On a warm Saturday afternoon, Harry stood before a classroom at Northwestern University's Executive Education Center. He no longer accepted as many private consulting assignments as he once had. Instead, he spent part of each year teaching corporate ethics, financial investigation, and fraud prevention to accountants, compliance officers, and business executives. Today's lecture carried a simple title: The Small Decisions That Become Large Crimes. Nearly 60 professionals filled the room. Harry never began with laws. He never began with accounting rules. Instead, he asked a single question: when does financial fraud begin? Hands rose immediately. When someone steals money. When false invoices are created. When accounting records are changed. Harry smiled. Those are common answers. He walked slowly across the room. In my experience, he paused, financial fraud usually begins much earlier. The room became quiet. It begins the first time someone convinces themselves that one dishonest decision is acceptable because it serves a larger purpose. Several students began taking notes. Harry continued. Every major fraud I've investigated contained hundreds of financial transactions. He looked around the classroom. But every one of those cases started with a conversation. Someone asking another person to ignore a rule, trust a shortcut, stay silent, choose loyalty over integrity. He never mentioned Reagan by name. He never discussed his own marriage. Some lessons remained personal. After class ended, a young compliance manager approached him. Professor Alexander. Harry smiled. Yes. I wanted to thank you. For what? I always thought fraud prevention was mostly about software. Harry laughed softly. So did many executives. The young man smiled. But today I realized it's mostly about people. Harry nodded. Technology finds transactions. He picked up his briefcase. Character prevents them. Meanwhile, Reagan had found a different calling. After leaving Brightstone permanently, she never returned to executive corporate management. Instead, she accepted a position with a non-profit organization that trained hospital administrators in ethical leadership and governance. She rarely spoke about her own experience publicly. When she did, she never presented herself as a victim. She described herself as a warning. One afternoon, she addressed a room filled with newly promoted department managers. She asked them a question remarkably similar to Harry's. Has anyone here ever ignored a small concern because questioning it felt uncomfortable? Nearly every hand rose. She smiled sadly. So did I. For the next hour, she explained how ambition could slowly silence judgment, how manipulation rarely looked threatening, how trust should never replace verification. When the presentation ended, a young woman quietly approached her. I've been feeling pressured by my supervisor. Reagan listened carefully. I wasn't sure if I was overreacting. Reagan recognized the uncertainty immediately. She had once lived inside it. Ask questions. The young woman nodded. And if they don't like my questions? Reagan smiled gently. The right leaders welcome honest questions. She paused. The wrong ones usually answer with pressure instead of facts. The young woman thanked her before leaving. As Reagan watched her go, she silently hoped one difficult conversation might prevent another life from following the same painful path. Later that evening, Harry and Reagan met at their favorite small Italian restaurant overlooking the Fox River. Neither of them had chosen the restaurant because of the investigation. They simply liked the quiet atmosphere. The owner knew them by name. The food never disappointed. Halfway through dinner, Reagan laughed unexpectedly. What? She smiled. I was just thinking. Dangerous. She laughed harder. I haven't heard you make that joke in years. I've been saving it. She looked across the table. Do you remember what today is? Harry pretended to think. Saturday. She shook her head. No. He smiled. Our first dinner after the trial ended. 5 years. Harry nodded. 5 years. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, Reagan reached into her purse. I have something. She placed a small envelope on the table. Harry raised an eyebrow. Should I be worried? She laughed. No. He carefully opened it. Inside rested a handwritten note. Only one sentence. Thank you for choosing patience before judgment. Harry read it twice before folding it carefully. I'll keep this. I hoped you would. When they returned home later that night, Harry walked upstairs to his office. The safe remained behind the familiar landscape painting. He smiled as he looked at it. Reagan quietly appeared beside him. You still look at that thing? Sometimes. What are you thinking? Harry answered honestly. That it never protected what I thought it protected. She leaned against the doorway. What did it protect but? Documents. He turned toward her. What really mattered was never inside. She smiled. I know. Harry looked around the office. Bookshelves, family photographs, old case files. The room no longer reminded either of them of betrayal. It reminded them of survival. Reagan stepped closer. Can I tell you something? Always. I used to think the worst moment of my life was opening that safe. Harry listened. Now I think the worst moment would have been spending the rest of my life pretending I hadn't. Harry understood exactly what she meant. Confession had not erased consequences. Truth rarely did. But truth had prevented permanent separation from reality. That mattered. Before leaving the office, Harry turned off the light. The hallway remained softly illuminated. They walked downstairs together. The house felt peaceful. Not because nothing difficult had ever happened there, because everything difficult no longer needed to remain hidden. Years later, when Harry eventually retired from active consulting, one of his former students asked him what case had taught him the most about financial investigations. The student expected an answer involving complex accounting, international banking, corporate fraud. Instead, Harry smiled quietly. The most important case of my career involved a safe. The student looked confused. A safe? Harry nodded. I discovered that evidence can expose crimes. He paused before continuing. But patience exposes character. The student wrote those words into a notebook without fully understanding them. Perhaps one day he would. Perhaps not. Harry had learned that the greatest lessons rarely revealed their value immediately. As for the safe itself, it remained exactly where it had always been. Locked, quiet, ordinary. Visitors would never know its history. They would never know that one sleepless night had changed 2 lives forever. And perhaps that was the most fitting ending of all, because the real story had never been about the safe. It had never even been about the documents. It had always been about 2 choices. One woman choosing whether to betray her conscience, one man choosing whether to react with anger or wait for the truth. Those choices shaped everything that followed. The documents became evidence. The conspiracy collapsed. Justice was served. Trust was rebuilt. And in the end, the most valuable thing Harry protected was never locked behind steel. It was the quiet belief that truth, though sometimes painfully slow, eventually finds every door left open in the darkness. Every life is shaped by moments when no one is watching. The biggest turning points rarely begin with dramatic decisions. They begin with small choices that seem harmless at the time. A shortcut, a secret, a compromise made just this once. Yet those tiny decisions have the power to either strengthen our character or slowly pull us away from the person we want to become. This story reminds us that trust is far more valuable than success titles or money. Once broken trust cannot be repaired with words alone. It is rebuilt through honesty, accountability, patience, and countless small actions repeated day after day. It also reminds us that true strength is not found in revenge. Harry could have chosen anger, but instead he chose wisdom. By waiting for the truth instead of reacting to emotion, he uncovered not only a larger crime, but also gave someone he loved the chance to face the truth and change. Forgiveness is never about pretending the pain didn't happen. It is about refusing to let pain decide who we become. In the end, integrity is the only wealth no one can steal, and character is the only legacy that continues long after every headline has faded. If this story touched your heart or made you reflect on your own life, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. What lesson stayed with you the most, and what would you have done if you were in Harry's place? And if you enjoy meaningful stories about trust, family resilience, and life's hardest choices, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next inspiring